The flames roared like a living beast. In the middle of smoke and unbearable heat, he knew he had only seconds to save 2 lives, and that he might never be the same again. It was supposed to be a quiet night in the suburbs, but an emergency call shattered the silence. A house engulfed in flames, screams of desperation, and the threat that lives could be lost at any moment. The veteran firefighter, known for his calm under pressure, was the first to arrive. What he didn't know was that this night would leave invisible scars, heavier than any gear he had ever carried. If you believe stories of courage deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The station was quiet that October night, the kind of quiet that made even the ticking of the old wall clock seem loud. Captain Jake Morrison sat at the worn wooden table in the common room, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee while reviewing equipment inspection reports. 23 years on the force had taught him to appreciate these rare moments of peace. The younger guys were in the bunk room, probably scrolling through their phones or catching some sleep. Outside, the suburban streets of Millbrook were empty, streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. Then it came. The alarm bell shattered the silence like thunder, followed immediately by the dispatcher's voice crackling through the speakers. Structure fire. Residential. 4827 Maple Avenue. Multiple calls reporting heavy smoke and flames visible. Possible entrapment. Jake's coffee mug hit the table before the address was even finished. His body moved on pure instinct, muscle memory from thousands of calls taking over. The transformation was instant, from tired man doing paperwork to firefighter ready for battle. "Let's go," he shouted, though the crew was already moving. Boots hit the floor, gear flew off hooks, and within seconds they were sliding down the pole and rushing to the trucks. Jake jumped into the driver's seat of engine 19, his hands already reaching for the ignition as his partner, Rodriguez, climbed in beside him. The garage doors were rising, revealing the dark October night beyond. "Maple Avenue, that's a 6-minute run if we push it," Rodriguez said, pulling up the GPS. But Jake didn't need it. He knew every street, every turn, every shortcut in this town. The engine roared to life, sirens wailing as they burst onto the empty streets. Red and white lights painted the sleeping houses as they passed. The massive truck taking corners at speeds that would make a civilian's heart stop. Jake's mind was already at the scene, running through possibilities. Residential fire at this hour meant people were likely sleeping. Possible entrapment meant someone might still be inside. His jaw clenched as he pressed harder on the accelerator. Behind them, he could hear Ladder 7 following, but they were at least 2 minutes back. As they turned onto Maple Avenue, Jake saw it immediately. The orange glow against the night sky, smoke billowing up like a volcanic eruption. His heart rate spiked, but his hands remained steady on the wheel. The house was fully involved, flames already breaking through the roof on the east side. This wasn't a kitchen fire or a small electrical problem. This was a beast, hungry and growing. "Jesus," Rodriguez breathed beside him. "That's going up fast." Jake pulled the engine to a stop, positioning it for optimal water supply access. But even as he set the parking brake, even as his training kicked in to assess the scene, something in his gut told him this night would be different. This night would test everything he thought he knew about being a firefighter. The scene that greeted Jake as he stepped off the truck was chaos incarnate. The 2-story colonial house was being devoured by flames that seemed to have a life of their own, dancing and reaching toward the sky with terrifying beauty. The fire had already claimed most of the first floor's east side, and black smoke poured from every window like the house was bleeding darkness into the night. The heat hit him even from 50 feet away, a wall of scorching air that made the October chill seem like a distant memory. Neighbors stood in their yards, some in bathrobes and slippers, their faces painted orange by the firelight, expressions frozen in horror and disbelief. But it was the man in the front yard that caught Jake's attention immediately. He was on his knees on the lawn, his white t-shirt smeared with soot, his face a mask of pure desperation. Mid-40s maybe, with the look of someone who'd just been ripped from sleep into a nightmare. The man was screaming something, his voice raw and breaking, but the roar of the flames and the wail of sirens made it impossible to hear clearly. Jake ran toward him, his gear weighing him down, but adrenaline pushing him forward. As he got closer, the words became clear, and they hit him like a physical blow. My son is still inside. Please, God, someone help me." Jake dropped to one knee beside the man, grabbing his shoulders. "Sir, where is your son? What room?" The father's eyes were wild, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "Upstairs, second floor, back bedroom on the right. Tyler's room. He's only 8 years old. I tried to get to him, but the smoke. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see." The man broke down, sobbing and coughing violently. Jake looked up at the house. The second floor was obscured by smoke, but flames hadn't reached that level yet, at least not visibly. But smoke was the real killer in house fires. The boy had minutes, maybe less. "Is anyone else inside?" Jake asked urgently. The father shook his head. "No, just Tyler. My wife's at her sister's. It's just us tonight. Please, you have to save him." Jake stood, his mind racing. Protocol said to wait for the full crew, establish water supply, coordinate entry. But every second that ticked by was another second that boy was breathing toxic smoke, another second closer to it being too late. Rodriguez was already pulling hoses, but the ladder truck was still at least a minute out. A minute might as well be an hour in a fire like this. Jake made his decision. He turned to Rodriguez. "I'm going in. Get that line ready for when I come out." Rodriguez's eyes widened. "Captain, wait for backup," but Jake was already moving toward the house, pulling his mask into place. The father grabbed at his arm. "Please bring him back. He's all I have. Please." Jake looked into the man's eyes and nodded once. Then he turned toward the inferno. The front door had been left open in the father's escape, black smoke pouring out like an invitation to hell. Jake took one deep breath through his regulator, said a quick prayer to whoever might be listening, and stepped into the darkness. Behind him, he heard Rodriguez calling for immediate backup, but the words faded as the roar of the fire consumed everything else. The moment Jake crossed the threshold, the world transformed into a nightmare of heat and blindness. The smoke was so thick, it was like swimming through black cotton, his flashlight beam barely penetrating more than a few inches ahead. The temperature hit him like a sledgehammer. His gear was rated for extreme heat, but he could already feel sweat pooling inside his turnout coat. The sound was overwhelming. The crack and pop of burning wood, the whoosh of superheated gases, the groaning of the house's structure as it slowly gave way to the flames. Every firefighter knew that sound. It was the house dying, beam by beam, joist by joist. Jake dropped to his knees immediately. The smoke was lighter near the floor, visibility marginally better. He could make out the vague outline of furniture, an overturned coffee table, a couch already smoldering. The living room was to his left, fully engulfed, flames licking across the ceiling like orange serpents. The staircase was straight ahead, still intact but barely visible through the smoke. He crawled forward, his breathing apparatus hissing with each breath, the weight of his air tank making every movement deliberate. Time was everything now. That boy had been in this toxic environment for who knew how long. As he reached the stairs, Jake made another split-second decision. Crawling would be safer, but too slow. He stood, gripping the railing, and began climbing. The steps creaked ominously under his weight plus gear. Halfway up, a section of ceiling in the living room collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a wave of superheated air rushing up the stairwell. Jake pressed himself against the wall, feeling the heat even through his protective gear. His face mask fogged briefly before clearing. "Keep moving," he told himself. "Every second counts." The second-floor hallway was a tunnel of smoke. Jake dropped to his knees again, feeling along the wall. First door on the right. Bathroom, he could tell from the tile floor. Second door, this had to be it. He pushed it open and crawled inside. "Tyler!" he shouted, though his mask muffled the sound. "Tyler, where are you?" The smoke was lighter here, the door having provided some protection. Jake's flashlight swept the room, kid's bedroom, posters on the walls, toys scattered on the floor. But no boy. Then he heard it, a tiny cough from the corner. There, behind the bed, wedged between the wall and a bookshelf, was a small figure. Tyler was curled into a ball, his Spider-Man pajamas soot-stained, his face streaked with tears and grime. His eyes were closed, and he was barely conscious. Jake's heart clenched. The boy had tried to hide from the fire, probably terrified and alone. He gathered the child into his arms, surprised at how light he felt. Tyler's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused. "It's okay, buddy. I've got you. I'm taking you to your dad," Jake said, though he wasn't sure the boy could hear him through the mask. Tyler went limp in his arms. Not a good sign, but he was breathing. That's all that mattered right now. Jake turned back toward the door, the boy cradled against his chest and prepared for the journey back through hell. The return journey was where everything truly went against the book. Jake knew that in training they'd tear him apart for what he was doing, entering alone, no backup, no established water supply, no search rope, no partner to watch his back. 23 years of drilling protocol into younger firefighters, and here he was, breaking every rule he'd ever preached. But protocol was written in sterile classrooms and meeting rooms, not in moments when an 8-year-old boy's life hung by a thread. As he emerged from Tyler's room with the child in his arms, the hallway had transformed into something from Dante's imagination. The smoke had thickened impossibly in just the few minutes he'd been searching, and now he could hear the hungry crackle of flames from somewhere below. Jake shifted Tyler to his left arm, keeping his right hand on the wall for guidance. The boy was completely unconscious now, dead weight against his chest. Each breath through Jake's regulator seemed louder, more labored. His air gauge would be dropping fast with the exertion. He had maybe 10 minutes of air left, 15 if he controlled his breathing. But controlling breathing while carrying a child through a burning building wasn't exactly covered in the manual. The heat was intensifying with each step. The fire had spread faster than anticipated, probably found a fuel source, maybe the basement, maybe a gas line. This house was turning into a death trap. At the top of the stairs, Jake paused. The orange glow from below told him everything he needed to know. The first floor was becoming impassable, but it was the only way out. He could wait for the ladder truck, wait for a window rescue, but Tyler didn't have that kind of time. The boy needed oxygen, needed medical attention immediately. Every second in this toxic environment was causing damage to his young lungs, his developing brain. Jake made his choice. He pulled Tyler tighter against his chest, protecting the boy's face with his turnout coat, and started down the stairs. The fourth step cracked under his weight, his boot punching through weakened wood. Jake caught himself on the railing, pulling his foot free, splinters of burning wood falling into the inferno below. The railing itself was hot even through his gloves, paint bubbling and peeling. Halfway down, a window somewhere exploded from the heat, sending a fresh wave of oxygen to feed the flames. The fire roared in response, and Jake felt the temperature spike dramatically. His ears were ringing from the noise, his vision blurring from sweat and smoke. Just keep moving, one foot, then the other. Get this kid out. The bottom of the stairs opened into hell itself. The living room to the left was fully involved, flames rolling across the ceiling. The path to the front door, maybe 15 feet, looked like a mile. Jake could see the doorway, a rectangle of relative darkness against the orange fury around him, but between him and escape was a gauntlet of falling debris and superheated air. He took a deep breath through his regulator, tasting rubber and stale air, and ran. Not the controlled movement they taught in training, but a desperate sprint. A ceiling beam crashed down behind him, sending up a shower of sparks. Something burning, furniture maybe, collapsed to his right. The heat was overwhelming, like being inside an oven. Tyler remained limp in his arms, and Jake pushed harder, his legs pumping, his world narrowing to that doorway, that promise of escape, that father waiting outside for his son. Jake burst through the front door like a man breaking the surface after too long underwater. The October night air hit him like a blessing, cool and clean compared to the inferno he'd just escaped. His legs were shaking, his lungs burning despite the breathing apparatus, but he didn't stop moving. The father was right there, having obviously waited as close to the house as anyone would let him, and the look on his face when he saw Jake carrying Tyler was something that would be burned into the firefighter's memory forever. Hope and terror warring in equal measure. "Tyler! Oh God, Tyler!" The father reached for his son, but Jake guided them both away from the house toward the ambulance that had arrived while he was inside. "He's breathing," Jake said, pulling off his mask as the paramedics rushed over with a pediatric oxygen mask and backboard. Smoke inhalation, unconscious but responsive. He laid Tyler gently on the gurney, the boy looking impossibly small and fragile against the white sheets. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, starting oxygen, preparing for transport. Tyler's eyelids fluttered and he coughed, a weak, raspy sound, but the most beautiful thing Jake had heard all night. The father hovered over his son, tears streaming down his face, one hand clutching Tyler's small fingers. "You're okay, buddy. Daddy's here. You're safe now." He looked up at Jake, and there were no words for a moment, just raw emotion passing between them. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice breaking. "Thank you for saving my boy." Jake nodded, unable to trust his own voice just then. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving him aware of how close it had all been, how many ways it could have gone wrong. Another minute, maybe two, and Tyler wouldn't have made it. But as Jake watched the father lean over his son, whispering reassurances, he noticed something that sent a fresh spike of concern through him. The man was swaying slightly, his breathing labored and wheezing. His lips had a faint blue tinge that had nothing to do with the emergency lights flashing around them. The father had said he'd tried to get to Tyler himself before the smoke drove him back. How long had he been in that toxic environment? How much smoke had he inhaled before Jake arrived? "Sir," Jake said, moving closer. "Sir, are you feeling okay?" The father looked up, confused. I'm fine. Just worried about Tyler." But even as he spoke, the man's legs buckled. Jake caught him before he hit the ground, supporting his weight as the father's breathing became more distressed. "Medic!" Jake shouted. "I need help over here!" The paramedics looked up from Tyler, saw the situation, and one immediately grabbed a second oxygen kit. The father was trying to protest, trying to stay with his son, but his body was betraying him. Smoke inhalation was insidious that way. You could feel fine one moment and be in serious trouble the next. The damage to the lungs, the carbon monoxide in the bloodstream, it could take time to fully manifest. Jake looked from father to son, both now needing medical attention, and felt the weight of unfinished business settling on his shoulders. The fire still raged behind them, the house beginning to collapse in on itself, and Jake knew what he had to do. He'd saved the son, but the job wasn't done. Not yet. The father's name was David. Jake learned this as the paramedics worked on him, fitting an oxygen mask over his face while David fought against it, trying to get back to Tyler. "Sir, you need to stay still," the lead paramedic, Martinez, said firmly. "Your oxygen levels are dangerously low. You've got significant smoke inhalation." But David wasn't listening, his eyes wild with paternal panic, fixed on the other gurney where his son was being stabilized. Jake knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "David, listen to me. Tyler is okay. The paramedics are taking care of him, but you need treatment too. He's going to need his dad healthy." Those words seemed to penetrate the panic. David's eyes focused on Jake, really seeing him for the first time. "I tried," he gasped through the oxygen mask. "I tried to get to him, but the smoke. I couldn't breathe. I left my boy in there." The guilt in his voice was raw, devastating. Jake had seen it before, the survivor's guilt that ate at people who escaped while loved ones remained in danger. "You did the right thing," Jake said firmly. "You got out and called for help. If you'd stayed in there, you'd both be dead. You saved your son's life by getting us here." Behind them, the house groaned, and a section of the roof collapsed inward, sending up a fountain of sparks and embers. The ladder truck had arrived and was setting up, firefighters deploying lines, but Jake knew it was a defensive operation now. Save the neighboring houses, contain the spread. The home where David and Tyler had lived was beyond saving. Everything they owned, every memory embedded in those walls, was turning to ash and smoke. But they were alive. That's what mattered. Jake stood to give the paramedics room to work, but David grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You went in alone," David said, his voice muffled by the mask, but his eyes intense. "I saw. No one else went with you. You risked everything for my boy." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. Yes, he'd broken protocol. Yes, he'd risked his life and potentially his career. But looking at Tyler, now conscious and crying weakly for his father, Jake knew he'd make the same choice again. "That's the job," he said simply, but David shook his head. "No," he wheezed. "That's who you are." The words hit Jake unexpectedly hard, and he had to turn away, ostensibly to check on the fire suppression efforts, but really to compose himself. The scene around them was controlled chaos now. More units had arrived, neighbors had been evacuated as a precaution, and the media was starting to show up at the perimeter. Rodriguez appeared at Jake's elbow, his face grim. "Captain, the chief's on his way. He's not happy about the solo entry." Jake nodded. He'd face whatever consequences came, but as he watched the paramedics preparing to transport both David and Tyler, he noticed David's breathing becoming more labored despite the oxygen. Martinez caught it too, checking his vitals again. "We need to move now," she said urgently. "Both of them immediate transport." But their ambulance could only take one patient at a time safely with the equipment they needed. The second ambulance was still 5 minutes out. David, despite his deteriorating condition, was trying to insist Tyler go first. And that's when Jake realized the night wasn't over, not by a long shot. If this story has you hooked so far, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in his place. The decision formed in Jake's mind before he was even fully conscious of it. David needed immediate transport, but he was refusing to leave without his son. The second ambulance was minutes away, minutes David might not have. His breathing was becoming more labored, the wheezing more pronounced. Carbon monoxide poisoning didn't wait for convenient timing. Jake looked at the house. The first floor was fully involved now, but the structure was still standing, though barely. The smoke was venting through the roof where it had burned through, which meant the second floor might actually have better visibility than before. It was insane. It was against every protocol, every rule, every ounce of common sense. But looking at David struggling to breathe, refusing treatment while trying to stay with Tyler, Jake knew what he had to do. "Martinez," Jake called to the paramedic, "can you stabilize them both here for 2 minutes?" She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Captain, what are you—" But Jake was already moving, not back toward the house, but to the engine where spare air bottles were stored. His current tank was nearly empty from the first rescue. Rodriguez saw him coming and immediately stepped in his path. "Jake, no. Whatever you're thinking, no." Jake replaced his air bottle with practiced efficiency, checking the gauge, full tank, roughly 30 minutes of air under normal conditions. In a fire, with heavy exertion, maybe half that. "The father needs immediate transport," Jake said, pulling his mask back into position. "But he won't leave his son. The house is venting now, smoke's clearing through the roof. If I can get to the second floor from the outside, through a window, I can do a secondary search, make sure we didn't miss anyone, and more importantly, buy time by making David think I'm doing something essential. He'll accept treatment if he thinks I'm still helping." It was a lie, partially. Jake knew the house was empty. David had confirmed it, but something else was driving him, something he couldn't quite articulate. The feeling that the night's work wasn't done, that there was something more required of him. Rodriguez grabbed his arm. "This is insane. The structure's compromised. You already saved the kid. Don't be a hero." Jake looked at his partner, this man he'd worked alongside for 5 years. "I'm not being a hero. I'm being a firefighter." "Radio the chief. Tell him I'm doing a secondary search for possible pets or additional victims. Follow protocol." Rodriguez's face was a mask of frustration and fear, but he stepped aside. He knew Jake well enough to recognize when his mind was made up. "You've got 5 minutes," Rodriguez said. 5 minutes and then I'm coming in after you myself." Jake nodded and turned toward the house. The ladder truck had extended its aerial, and Jake climbed quickly, his renewed air supply and second wind of adrenaline giving him strength. The ladder operator, Thompson, looked at him in disbelief. "Captain, the whole second floor could go any minute." "Then I better be quick," Jake replied, reaching the top where the ladder touched against a second-story window. The glass had already blown out from the heat, and smoke was pouring out, though not as thick as before. Jake could see into what looked like a master bedroom, furniture still visible through the haze. He took one breath to center himself, said another prayer to add to the night's collection, and climbed through the window into the burning house for the second time. The master bedroom was a smoke-filled time capsule of a life about to be erased. Even through the haze, Jake could see the personal touches. Family photos on the dresser, their glass cracked from the heat, a wedding dress visible through the partially open closet door, already beginning to smolder. The smoke was indeed lighter up here with the roof venting, but the floor beneath his feet felt wrong, too soft, too warm. The fire was eating the house from below, consuming the very bones of the structure. Jake moved quickly but carefully, testing each step. He wasn't really searching for anyone, he knew that. So why was he here? What had driven him back into this dying house? The answer came as he moved through the room, his flashlight beam catching on more fragments of David and Tyler's life. A Father's Day card on the nightstand, a child's drawing framed on the wall, stick figures labeled Daddy and Me standing in front of a crudely drawn house. This house. Jake found himself grabbing the drawing, stuffing it inside his turnout coat. Then a photo from the dresser. David, Tyler, and a woman who must be the wife at the sister's house, all smiling at some beach. Into his coat, that went too. He was salvaging memories, he realized, trying to save something, anything, from the life that was turning to ash around him. A tremendous crack from below made the whole floor shudder. Jake dropped to his knees instinctively as a wave of superheated air rushed up through the floor vents. The fire had broken through somewhere below, probably the ceiling of the first floor. The house was entering its death throes. Time to go. But as Jake turned back toward the window, he saw Tyler's room across the hall, the door still open from his first rescue. Something pulled him toward it. Not duty, not protocol, but something deeper. He crossed the hallway in 3 quick strides, the floor groaning ominously beneath him, and entered the boy's room one more time. The smoke was thicker here now, fed by the draft from the hallway, but Jake's light found what he was somehow looking for, a stuffed dinosaur on the bed, worn and obviously loved. One of those toys that children carry everywhere until they literally fall apart. He grabbed it, thinking of Tyler in the ambulance, scared and separated from everything familiar. The boy would need something to hold on to in the hospital, something that survived the nightmare. As Jake turned to leave, the floor beneath him sagged suddenly, and he heard the crack of breaking wood. The joists were failing. The floor was about to collapse. Jake lunged for the doorway just as a section of floor behind him gave way completely, opening a hole straight down into the inferno below. The heat that rushed up was overwhelming, like standing at the mouth of a volcano. He scrambled into the hallway on his hands and knees, the stuffed dinosaur clutched absurdly in one hand, his flashlight in the other. The house was screaming now, wood splintering, nails pulling free from boards, drywall cracking and falling in chunks. Jake made it to the master bedroom window just as Rodriguez's voice crackled over his radio. "Jake, get out now! The whole east side is coming down!" Jake didn't need to be told twice. He practically dove through the window onto the ladder platform, Thompson already backing them away from the house as the entire second floor began to collapse inward, folding like a house of cards in slow motion. Jake clutched the rescued items, a drawing, a photo, a stuffed dinosaur, and wondered if he'd lost his mind. But as the ladder descended, and he saw David being loaded into the ambulance, finally accepting treatment, and Tyler in the second ambulance that had just arrived, holding his mother's hand as she'd apparently just arrived at the scene, Jake knew why he'd gone back. Sometimes saving a life meant more than just pulling someone from flames. Sometimes it meant preserving something of who they were, what they'd lost, so they'd have something to rebuild from. The aftermath unfolded in a series of moments that seemed both rushed and frozen in time. Jake stood on solid ground, watching as both ambulances prepared to depart, their lights painting the chaotic scene in alternating reds and blues. David was on oxygen and IV fluids, his condition stabilized but still serious. Before they closed the doors, he caught Jake's eye and managed to pull his mask aside for a moment. "My boy?" he asked, the two words carrying the weight of everything. "He's going to be fine," Jake assured him. "He's in the other ambulance with your wife. You're both going to be okay." David nodded, tears flowing freely now, and allowed the paramedics to replace his mask. Tyler's ambulance was about to leave when Jake jogged over, pulling the stuffed dinosaur from inside his coat. The boy's mother, Sarah, Jake had learned, was holding Tyler's hand as he lay on the gurney, an oxygen mask over his small face, but his eyes open and alert. When Jake held up the dinosaur, Tyler's eyes went wide. "Rex," he said weakly, reaching out with his free hand. Sarah took the toy and placed it in Tyler's arms, then looked at Jake with an expression of such gratitude it made his chest tight. "He's had that since he was 2, she said, voice breaking. "It's his protector, he says, guards him from bad dreams." Jake also handed her the photo and drawing, slightly singed, but intact. "Thought you might want these too." It did. The house chose that moment to finally surrender completely, the remaining structure collapsing with a roar that made everyone turn. Where a family home had stood an hour ago, there was now only a pile of burning rubble, smoke, and steam rising into the night sky. The firefighters continued spraying water, but it was clear there was nothing left to save of the structure. Sarah watched her home disappear with a strange calm. "It's just stuff," she said quietly, clutching Tyler's hand. "We have what matters." She looked at Jake. "You gave me back my family, both of them. How do you thank someone for that?" Jake didn't have an answer. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving him exhausted and shaky. His gear felt impossibly heavy, and he was becoming aware of various aches and pains he'd ignored during the rescues. Chief Williams had arrived and was standing nearby, his expression unreadable as he watched Jake. There would be consequences for the protocol violations, reports to write, probably a suspension pending investigation. But looking at Tyler clutching his dinosaur, at David being treated in the ambulance, at Sarah holding her family's rescued memories, Jake couldn't bring himself to care about any of that. Rodriguez appeared at his shoulder, helping him out of his air pack. "That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever seen," his partner said quietly. Then after a pause, "And the bravest." The ambulances pulled away, sirens wailing as they headed for the hospital. The crowd of neighbors began to disperse, the immediate drama over. The news crews were packing up, having gotten their footage of the dramatic rescue. The other firefighters continued the overhaul, making sure the fire was completely out, checking for hotspots. It was routine now, the emergency over, lives saved. Jake should have felt triumphant. He'd saved a child, helped save a father, preserved some small pieces of their life from the flames. By any measure, it was a successful night. But as he stood there watching the smoke rise into the darkness, something felt different. Something had shifted inside him during those terrifying minutes in the burning house, something he couldn't quite name yet, but that sat heavy in his chest, like smoke that wouldn't clear. 3 weeks later, Jake stood at the edge of Millbrook Park, watching the sun set over the town he'd protected for more than 2 decades. The investigation was over. He'd received a formal reprimand for the protocol violations, but also a commendation for valor. Chief Williams had shaken his hand and told him privately that he'd have done the same thing. David and Tyler had both made full recoveries, though Tyler would need monitoring for potential respiratory issues. They'd sent a card to the station, Tyler's crayon drawing of a firefighter prominently displayed. Jake kept thinking he should feel proud, satisfied, complete. But instead, there was this weight that wouldn't lift, this shadow that followed him through his days. He'd been back to work, responded to other calls, gone through the motions of normal life. But something fundamental had changed that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he could feel Tyler's small weight in his arms, could see David's desperate face, could hear the house dying around him. It wasn't trauma exactly. He'd seen worse over the years, dealt with casualties, faced danger countless times. This was different. It was the weight of understanding something he'd never quite grasped before. That every rescue carries a cost, not paid in injuries or citations, but in pieces of yourself left behind in the smoke. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, David's wife. They were having a small gathering that weekend, a combination housewarming for their temporary apartment and thank you party for the firefighters. Tyler specifically wanted him there, she said. Jake typed back that he'd try to make it, though he wasn't sure he would. Facing them again meant confronting that weight, that change. It was easier to let them move on, to let that night become just another story, another rescue in a long career of rescues. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't true. That night would never be just another story. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange that reminded him uncomfortably of fire. Jake had saved lives that night, had done his job and more. David and Tyler were alive together, rebuilding their life from the ashes. By every external measure, it was a victory. But Jake had learned something in those flames that no amount of training could have prepared him for. That true courage isn't the absence of fear or the perfect execution of protocol. It's carrying someone else's life in your hands and knowing that no matter how many you save, a part of you stays behind in every fire, a piece of your soul traded for theirs. He thought about Tyler's dinosaur, Rex, the protector from bad dreams. Jake had been that protector for one night, had stood between a family and disaster. But who protected the protectors from the dreams that followed? Who carried them when the weight became too much? There were no answers in the sunset, no resolution in the fading light, just the knowledge that tomorrow he'd get up, put on his uniform and answer the next call. Because that's what firefighters do. They carry the weight so others don't have to. A family walked by on the park path, parents and a young boy about Tyler's age. The child was laughing, carefree, safe. Jake watched them pass and felt that weight shift slightly, not lighter, but maybe more bearable. He'd given Tyler the chance to laugh like that again, to walk with his father in a park on an ordinary evening. That had to be worth something. That had to be enough. But deep down, Jake knew the truth that every firefighter eventually learns. You don't emerge from the flames unchanged. The fire always claims something, even when everyone makes it out alive. For Jake, it had claimed his certainty, his ability to see the job as just a job. Now every call would carry the echo of that night. Every rescue would remind him of the weight. As darkness settled over Millbrook, Jake turned away from the sunset and walked back toward his truck. His phone showed another message from Sarah, a photo of Tyler sleeping peacefully, Rex the dinosaur standing guard on his nightstand. "He sleeps through the night now," the message read. "No more nightmares. Thank you for bringing his protector back." Jake stared at the photo for a long moment, feeling something crack inside his chest. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the weight never goes away. Maybe you just learn to carry it, to make it part of who you are. Maybe that's what makes someone not just a firefighter, but a guardian, someone who stands between life and death with one purpose: to save lives, knowing it will cost them something they can never quite get back. Jake put his phone away and drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook. Tomorrow there would be another shift, another chance to stand between someone and disaster. The weight would still be there, the invisible scar from that October night. But so would the knowledge that somewhere in this town, a boy was sleeping peacefully, protected by a worn, stuffed dinosaur, and the memory of the firefighter who went into the flames alone and brought him home. That truth would have to be enough to carry him through whatever came next. It would have to be enough to make the weight worth bearing, because in the end, that's what courage really is. Not the absence of scars, but the willingness to earn them for someone else's tomorrow. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments.